Hi there, so in this exercise what we're going to look at is using PHP to interact with the database. So at the moment we've got our database sitting on our server. It's got these elements inside it, so a set of items with a type, a fragrance and a price. Currently what we are actually doing is we're actually interacting with the database from PHP but the interaction is via SQL. So PHP every time I do things on this graphical interface, is generating SQL statements and we're getting the results back from the database. So what we're going to do now is essentially replace PHP with our own PHP page that has a proper style and interacts with the database contents in the way that we are expecting and wanting. So this is kind of what we are looking for. Our Hayfield Holistics website, here's our shop, and here are the items that I'm pulling off the database. They're not particularly well organized at the moment, but we'll worry about that later. The key thing is these items are coming off a database and are not hard-coded into the PHP. So let's have a little look at how we can do that. So I have set up in my EX10 folder my standard HTML template page for the things that we've been doing, and of course we need to write our PHP tags in here to say some PHP is coming. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use comments to say what exactly do we need to do. So what are the stages we need to go through? So we need to set up some variable values or for things that we're going to use. Then we need to connect to the database. Once we've connected to the database, we need to generate our SQL statement. Once we have generated the SQL, we need to execute the SQL query. Once we've executed the query, we need to display the results of the query, and the last thing we need to do is close the connection to the database. So these are the sets of things that we need to do in order to interact with the database. And what I'm actually going to do, rather than typing all of this code in, I'm just going to copy bits and pieces and explain it as we go along. So setting up the variables is my starting point. So you can see that I've set up variables for username, password, the host name and the database name. Obviously it's really important that these are correct, otherwise things won't work. So your username is and your password are the things that you use to connect to your database. So this is your database password in here. Okay, maybe I should write that. So your database password. This is the location of your database. So because the database is sitting on the same server as your code, then we can use localhost here. So that is saying look on the same server rather than looking on the internet. It will be equally feasible to look on the internet, so have a web address or a URL in here of your database and connect into it remotely. So we're going to use localhost for this because our database is on the same server as our PHP pages, and the database name will be your username. So that's how it's been set up automatically for you. So once we've set those things up, we need to connect into the database. So that's my next step. So connecting to the database uses this PDO database object, and we're using the host name, the database name, the username and the password that we've set up here already. So it just makes life easier if we set it up in this way and pass the information through like this. once we've done that, that's got us connected to our database. I now need to generate my query. So I'm gonna generate a simple one just to get us started. So let us select everything. So select star, select everything from the database table, which is called shop. So it's important not to confuse the database name, which is your username, ES389 for me, from the table name inside your database, in this case shop. And it's very important that this is correct and matches your database. So once we've generated the SQL, we need to actually execute it. So those are two separate processes, and I can execute it with this statement here. You might remember when we were talking about using PHP MyAdmin to look at SQL, a great idea at this point is to run that query inside SQL, inside PHP MyAdmin, and that will give you confidence that your query is working correctly. So now we can execute the query. That means that the query is executed on the database, and the database will now send the results of that query back to us. We have to use them in some kind of sensible way. So to display the results, then we can do this. So it's a standard kind of format, so it's a while loop that essentially goes around every row of data that's being returned from the database. So that's what this does. It says go around every row of data and in $row place the data in an array essentially. So if we look at this, we can go echo to display from the row the name. So at the moment, even though I've pulled all of the data back from the database, I'm only actually displaying the data that appears in the name field. So I display the first name, concatenate or add a string which has a little space in it so that I can actually read what's going on, and I'm going to keep going round and round this loop until I get to the end of the data that's being returned from the database. The final thing that I need to do is to close the database connection, which I can do like this. Okay, so that is setting up your PHP page to connect to the database, generate an SQL query, execute the query, display the results, and close the connection. So if we go and have a look, we can see that we have just got here, one after another, the names of the items in the database. The rose soap, followed by the lavender soap, followed by the Luxury gift box, followed by another Luxury gift box, followed by rejuvenating face cream. So those are the items in the database that have just been displayed. And I can think about displaying these in a nicer way. So for example, if I now replace this code with something just a little bit more sophisticated, then let me just go down here and copy this into my database. So what we can see here is, of course, because I'm using the echo command, I can send out HTML tags. So I can send a paragraph tag out. I can put the name of the item and the cost of it and some words around here. So name of the item at the entity value for the pound sign, which is what this is, the price, and then just the word that says each, and then close that paragraph tag at the end. And I will do one paragraph for each item in my database. So we can do this, which would give us, if I go and have a look on the website, then you can see that I've now got the items displayed in a bit more of a sensible way. And there's lots of things that we can do here in order to make this data look nice. So, we could set this up in a table if we wanted to display our products and style the table. The other thing we can do fairly easily is actually include an image in my database table. So the image is actually sitting on my server, and inside the database table is the file name or the file path of the image, and I can just build that into a SQL statement and build that into an image tag to pull that from the database. So there's lots of things we can do with the database to make this a bit more sophisticated. We can build, for example, we can build our query based on information that's coming in from a user form. So we could ask the user to enter their search terms, for example, and then we could generate our SQL statement from what the user's entered. And once you start getting onto doing those things that are a bit more sophisticated, when we're building the SQL statement up, then I think a good idea is actually to put the SQL statement into a variable and actually echo it to the screen so that we can understand and see what it's actually like and make sure that works for us. So there's lots of things we can do with the database, reading from the database, but I think this is a great starting point.